Thank you for coming today. This is the 7th discussion class on the Daehaeng Kunsim's translation of the Diamond Sutra. The English translation is The Great Unfolding. And this will be the last class for a while. We're stopping for Buddha's birthday coming up next week after next. And people here are pretty busy with getting ready for that. So, but we'll pick up again in September. We're looking at chapter 9 begins on page 87 today. And chapter 9 is one of the little bit more unusual chapters. It takes a little bit of a turn, and I'm not exactly sure why it does this. But we'll see that in a minute. But the title we decided on in English is "What You See Isn't What You're Seeing." Now, this could also, you could do this a couple of different ways. You could say all of the concepts that you think of aren't truly as you're imagining them. All the things that you imagine it having a certain characteristic or a certain nature, but that's not the way it is. And this chapter talks about what were kind of called the sort of like the levels of enlightenment, or you could say levels of advancement, as a person going from someone who, this is the way it was traditionally interpreted, as someone going from getting a sense of the non-duality of the world to as their practice deepens and deepens. And I think it's a lot of Indian influence, because people are described as being like a once returner. Oh, you have to be reborn one more time as a human being. Or a non-returner, you don't have to be, this is your last time having to be reborn as a human being. And kind of the idea is that, traditionally the idea is that, to use American English, you're getting your stuff together. You're figuring things out, but you're not quite there yet. You need to be born one more time, or sometimes 3 more times, or you've done enough. This is the last time you have to be reborn as a human being. And that have to part, I think, is another aspect, because at some point people can choose where they want to be reborn. And that's another aspect. But I don't know if these contents were here because this was a popular style of thinking or a popular way of evaluating one's practice. Where am I at in my level of practice? Because it's, goalposts are nice. Goal setting is helpful. Okay, if I'm in the army, right? I'm a corporal. I know where I am. Oh, I want to advance. I want to have more money and fewer people yelling at me. I want to be a sergeant, or I want to be a captain or a major. And so there's a very nice, clean progression. But with spiritual practice, it's not that progression isn't something that's easy to judge. It's the true judgment of progression it's not instant, but sometimes you look back and say, oh, I handle this situation a lot better than I did 3 years ago. And the only, Sunim always talks about you have to ripen the fruit on your own tree, right? Don't worry about what other trees are doing, right? Oh, this person's practice is so wonderful, and they're so nice, and Yeah, I mean, you could say the same thing about somebody's job or somebody's family, or, oh, their children are so nice. I'll just take their children and make them, that's the thought of a crazy person. But it gets easy to kind of envy how well somebody else is doing. But for ourselves, the standard has to be, how am I doing compared to myself, right? How often if I see something I don't like, how long do I get caught up in that before I think, oh, wait a minute, I got to let go of that, right? Because if you keep practicing and trusting, we all have this non-dual connection with the whole. We're all part of this non-dual whole. And in a way, this is probably considered skillful means, or in Korean, bangpyeon. But when we remember to let go, to actually entrust what's going on, instead of just trying to use our own thoughts, trying to force our way through it with either muscle or thought, or just complaining, right? The more we do that, the more we have an awareness when something arises that, I need to let go of this. And the faster that awareness arises. And this is kind of a big deal, because you get to the point where when something big happens, and there's a half second where you now have the ability to decide how you're going to react. And that can completely save your life. Just, okay, I can get angry at this person, or I can say, okay, a little tough, but I need to let go of this. All right. And that comes with practice. That comes, even people who don't know about this practice, who meditate, will find they get that half second, 3/4 second gap before they react to something. And they have just enough awareness to make a decision. And that's a really big deal. So that's not really the point here today, but this idea that what I'm looking at isn't as I imagine it, right? The old analogy is, I can hold this up, right? And what you see and what I see are completely different things. I mean, they're completely different things, but it's still the same thing, right? So I see this dark circle, and it's got a little bit of condensation on it, and what are you talking about? Plant? What plant? There's no plant here. You crazy? Light colored? You're nuts, right? We can do this. But, from a perspective, it's there. And so neither perspective is actually the truth. And so we have to be a little bit careful with this stuff. There is some practical stuff where it gets easy to say, I'm reluctant to say this, but deluded people and perhaps evil people will say, oh, it's all the same, nothing matters, so go ahead and kill these people, right? Or whether he's alive or dead, it's all the same. They treat other people like this. Oh, she's also part of myself, so no matter what I do to her, it's like doing it to myself, so it doesn't matter. Well, Hanmaum Sunim, who was one of the great Korean monks of the early 20th century, basically said, he said something like, those deluded idiots who ignore the law of cause and effect, right? Because you and I both exist. We're part of an interconnected whole. But however I treat you, all that radiates out into the whole. So if I treat you badly, that's all coming back to me. And functionally, it's coming back to me with interest. So even though we're not dual, even though we're all connected, the law of cause and effect still applies. So you have to be careful with that. You can't just say, oh, everything's the same, so whatever I do is all good. Because if you are at the level of a Buddha, you can probably function like that without any problem. But if you haven't gotten to the level of a Buddha, then that means that habits and discriminations and fixed views about how things are still lurking inside you. And they'll come up through your consciousness. Oh, everything's all the same, but I want his money, or I want their children, or it's all the same. And that's not a healthy path to go down. That will be really unpleasant really quickly. Because we're not two, because we're all connected, the good and the bad I experience, right? Whatever I send out, I'm sitting in the middle of that. So if it's dualistic, if it's hateful, I'm going to get the results of that. It's it's like going onto a battlefield, excited about the idea of shooting someone, but it's a battlefield. The bullets are coming my way too. So it's like you go looking for murder or theft. People always think I'm going to be the one doing this, but it's like it's just murder, it's just theft, it's just robbery, rape, whatever villain type stuff, and they get that as much as anybody else. Like I said, plus interest. I can't explain why the interest, but if you look at it, it's always got interest. It's a strange thing. It's like the longer we see it in money, and I don't know if it's an analogy or a law of the universe, but the longer the payment gets delayed, the bigger the payment's going to have to be. It's just one of those funny things. But okay, so looking at page 89, this Korean is quite profound, and I'll go ahead and read the English. There's a couple of different ways this English could have been expressed. So, Subhuti, what do you think? One mind, where all energies are connected and work together as one, unconstrained by time and space, is never trapped by birth and death, and gives rise to intentions unstained by anything of the material world. In the midst of this, do you think that I have attained the state free of discriminations between birth and death, time and space, shapes and categories, and divisions, or shapes and characteristics, and divisions and categories? Another way, it's like the Buddha is saying, in the middle of this one whole, where everything is flowing as one, where there's no discrimination between self and other, could the thought arise, oh, I have attained this. I have attained, it's kind of funny, I have attained the state free of discriminations between birth and death, time and space, right? If I say I have attained the state free of discriminations, free of birth and death, right away I'm saying there's a state free of birth and death versus a state of birth and death. And so it's, the point the Buddha is making here is like, no, if you're really at that level, that's not how you're going to perceive the world, right? If I've attained this level where I can clearly see that there are no discriminations, I'm not going to then go and describe the world in terms of these discriminations. I'm not going to say, I've attained something. Because the idea is that if I've attained something, there was something missing, right? There's nothing missing. Everything's complete. And so I'll talk more about this in the conclusion, but one of the main takeaways here, let me see. One of the main takeaways is that okay, if you look at page 97, 97쪽 보시면, I'll go ahead and read the first paragraph. Actually, let's look at page 95. 95쪽 저 마지막 저 부분 보십시오. So 95, 90, page 95. Subhuti, consider this. Could an arahat, having fully experienced the depths of all these different states, think, I have attained the way of an arahat? And then the next page. Subhuti answered, no, world-honored one, for one who has fully awakened understands that there is no fixed aspect to be called an arahat. Further, if an arahat should say they've attained the level of an arahat, then they are still trapped in ignorance, and everything they do is subtly permeated by dualistic thinking. Like I said, I don't know how big of an issue this was at the time, but one of the big red flags that this is warning us about is people who say, I'm enlightened. The other, because the other one, the next piece, it's not stated here, but the next thing you see is, I can save you, right? If you believe in me, I can save you. If you follow me, I can save you. And there's people who say that, right? So if you read this carefully, people who say, I can save you, follow me, I know the way, you should run the other direction from these people, right? That's somebody's got something wrong there. They're either, in the case of an arahat, if somebody was at a really high level and said that, then the Buddha is saying, or actually this is Subhuti. Subhuti is saying they still have some dualistic thinking, right? There's still some trace of dualistic thinking in how they approach the world and how they look at things. And they don't know it yet. Or they miss it. And this dualistic thinking is going to get them in trouble, right? Okay. I talked about this last time, but on the bigger scale, anytime you see a government start trying to demonize someone else, right? These people over here aren't human. That's a big one. Historically, that's very popular. The Chinese aren't human, or the Japanese aren't human, or the Koreans aren't human. The Poles, the Polish people, they're subhuman, like half human. And so they don't feel pain the way we feel pain. This is like the first step to really evil stuff. If they're not human, then you can treat them like you would a cow, right? You can steal their property and their land and their lives. So anytime you see somebody saying stuff like that, this kind of raising up this kind of dualistic thing, they're different than us. They're less than us. Be very careful about that. I mean, some cultures, if the people next door are actually cannibals, right? you want to be careful. Okay, I don't need to hate these people, but I can't trust them, right? If, the Japanese or the Chinese or whoever, if the government's behaving very badly, you can say, okay, we're not going to trust these people. We don't have to hate them, but we're not going to trust them. Be on the lookout. So you have to have some good judgment at the same time, but you have to be really careful about giving rise to these kinds of fixed ideas and to dwelling on these kinds of fixed ideas. Okay. So the starting point is this idea that if I've attained this truly non-dualistic state, I'm not going to say I've attained something separate, because I'm not going to see it that way, right? Everything is just one. In the middle of this one, there's nothing to raise up. Okay. There's a little bit on page 91. This is the beginning of a series of comparisons about, the person who had traditionally, the person who has begun on the path of practice, and the traditional name was Sadawan. Sadawan, I think that's right. And in the English translation is stream enterer. But the way Daehaeng Sunim wrote this is kind of unexpected, because it's more like saying anybody who has sensed this flowing whole is called a stream enterer. They've entered the stream. They're aware of the flowing nature of this whole. They're participating more in the flowing nature of this whole. We talk about spiritual practice in terms of having faith in this non-dual foundation and entrusting what happens to us and observing it. And in a way, that itself is flowing, right? Instead of trying to grasp something, instead of trying to necessarily fight against it, it's like, oh, right, entrust this. Do my best with it, but before I get worked up about it, entrust it, and then see, pay attention and see what the best response might be. See what a good response might be. Okay. So, while most traditional translations of the Diamond Sutra have stream enterer as the lowest level or the first level, I don't think that's what Daehaeng Sunim is doing here. I think she's just saying this is just a general stage for anybody who's become aware of this. You can call them a person who has touched this flowing. Maybe you could describe it that way. Actually, I kind of like that. I think I might need to write that down before I forget it. And so if you look at page 93 through 97, it all has more or less similar patterns. On page 93, I'll go ahead and read the description of once returner. Subhuti, consider this. Even though a once returner is capable of functioning as one with this whole, does such a being think, I have attained the level of a once returner? Subhuti answered, no, world honored one, because once returner is just a label. They're like an echo in the mountains that we label once returner. But in fact, there is no leaving or returning. Right? So again, in the middle of this whole, there's nothing that goes or comes. From a certain perspective, somebody like the Buddha or somebody who's at a very high level might say, this person's done almost everything they have to. They'll only be forced to be reborn in this realm one more time, right? I think that's an aspect that it's not really an aspect here, but at the level they're talking about here, it's being forced to be reborn in the human realm, right? You're being propelled here by your karma and your the cause and effect and your connections. The things you've done kind of push you in this direction, and you don't have a lot of choice about it. It's like you don't have the option to say, no, I'm good, I'm fine, thanks. I'd rather go over here. It's like, in that instant between death and life again, what is appealing to you? What catches your attention? And it's this realm. And it's like, bam, here. And if you've been living a bit diligently, you're immediately drawn to a higher level family, right? You're immediately drawn to perhaps a more harmonious family, perhaps a more loving family, perhaps a situation where you don't have to worry about material needs. And it's just in that instant. If you've been living at a lower level, then even though you're a human being, you're going to be attracted, you're going to be naturally drawn to something at a lower level. It's like, ooh, that looks like fun, right? And, people who like to party all night long seem like they're fun until you're trying to go to sleep next door, and then it's not very much fun. And so, but that happens just in an instant. So non-returner, once returner. Non-returner is apparently somebody who's not going to be compelled to be reborn again. They're either going to a higher realm, perhaps, or I would guess they're probably going to a higher realm, and maybe Arahat and some of the other ones are people who have more of a choice about where they want to go. What's the best place for me? Where's the need the greatest? Okay. And so, in one sense, non-returner, once returner, arahat, all of these, if somebody's really at that stage and you ask them, they would never say, oh, I'm a once returner, right? Once returner is the label, is the description that somebody else gives them. Or perhaps in the case of an arahat, it's their responsibility. It's their job. What's their job supposed to be? You're an arahat, so you need to be doing this. That's just what they do, right? And so that's Daehaeng Sunim follows the traditional one where she said that's the label, right? That's not the label they gave themselves. That's the label that, for convenience sake, other people apply to them. That's kind of like the description of what looks like it's going on. That's not the real nature. Any person you can pick out, you can say, oh, he's a father. Well, but that's just one aspect of his life, right? That's not the whole of his entire existence, past, present, and future. That's just the label of a relationship with somebody else. Right? Oh, she's a worker. She's a union member. She's a mother, daughter, sister, whatever. That's the label of a relationship. That's not the real thing. That's like I said, that's just the label. That's not the totality of your existence. And so this chapter is really hits this pretty hard. And I think one of the things we can learn from this is we need to be careful to let go of the labels that we have about other people and other things. And if somebody's in terms of spiritual work, if somebody's at this truly non-dual level, they're not going to be saying things like, I'm enlightened or I can save you. But even somebody at this level, the label is just the label. So whatever I think about politicians or other people, that's just a label. That's not necessarily who they are. Right? So there was somebody years ago, there was somebody who was having some trouble, and what was it? They were behaving a little bit badly. And I asked Daehaeng about them. I said, this guy seems to be having a lot of problems. And she wouldn't say anything. She just stared. She didn't look at me. She just looked straight ahead. And it was really uncomfortable. And then I'm sitting there and like, okay, aren't you going to say anything? Please say something. And after 30 seconds or a minute, I'm like, okay, I'll be going now. But I think the case was, she gave an example one time in a Dharma talk, and it was somebody who was behaving badly. And she said, if I call him a thief, then that becomes a reality, right? I think that way, the unseen, it begins to crystallize around him. Oh, he's a thief. If I say he's not a thief, that's actually also not true either, right? He did take some stuff that wasn't his to take, or whatever the situation was, or behaved badly or whatever. And so that's also true, that he behaved badly. But by giving rise to the thought, oh, he's like this, then it makes it harder for him to change. This is something that's actually very true, is that even if we don't say anything, if we give rise to the thought, oh, he's like this, he feels that energy, right? She feels that energy. And they feel constrained by it. And it's a weird thing, but people do this thing where it's like, oh, you think I'm a bad person? Oh, I'll show you, bad person, right? Watch this. Where people push back against you, they get angry, they get frustrated, they get confused, and it creates a whole nother level of emotion on top of the situation, which makes it even harder for the situation to evolve into something better. Whereas if you don't say anything, because if I accuse somebody of something, no, I didn't, no, yes, you did, no, I didn't, it automatically becomes a fight. It's like a whole nother extra level of unhelpful energy stuffed on top of it. Whereas if if somebody's behaving badly, and instead of reacting to it, how do we go forward? What's the best way forward? Okay, you're not in charge of the money anymore, right? And I'm not going to accuse you of anything. We're just going to go this way forward. Treating things that way actually allows them to evolve a lot more easily sometimes. So within a certain level of good judgment, not reacting to people, not giving rise to judgments, actually helps them evolve faster too. That's kind of an interesting thing. So, one of the big takeaways from this chapter is that everything, our inherent state is everything working together as one. Right? Fundamentally, there's nothing to add to this. But at the same time, we do have this history of dualistic thinking. We have all this history of looking at things in a dualistic way. And it's gone on so long that it's just recorded. It's like a recording within us that we've recorded 100,000 times. And so even though one case expires, even though one instance of dualistic thinking arises, okay, I'm not going to react to that, I let it go. But there's so many recordings. In Korean, we use the word karmic consciousness or karmic states of consciousness. Or in Korean, it's opshik. There's so many of these coming out again and again that we have to continuously take those and entrust them back and keep entrusting them and keep entrusting them and work at not being caught by those. And one of the things we need to not be caught by is these labels of I, me. So if we find ourselves thinking, I have attained this, I am enlightened, even though you have a great experience, if you find yourself thinking, I am enlightened, let go of that thought as quick as you can, right? You may have a new understanding of something, but if you carry around the thought, I'm enlightened, that truly enlightened people don't carry that around. And that dualistic aspect of I will just spawn more instances of dualistic thinking that will cause you trouble. So, but this inherently functioning as one is our fundamental state. This is why Daehaeng Sunim said that inherently all beings share the same life, the same mind, the same body, work together as one, and freely give everything as one. That's a description of the ceaselessly changing, manifesting whole and our existence within it. And hopefully we'll all one day very clearly recognize that. But until that time, remember this non-dual foundation and keep entrusting what's arising back to here and go forward just paying attention. See what happens. See, if you keep entrusting like that, you'll get some really deep experiences. Observe those, see what you can learn from those, but then let them go back again, because it's like we only have so much capacity. If we start clinging to one experience, it prevents us. There's no space for new experiences, for deeper experiences. So we have, even a great experience, we have to take that and trust that, and then move forward. All right, we'll go with the small group discussion now, but thank you very much for joining us.